All right, so we're going to start the second half of Unit 3, which is going to deal with photosynthesis, Calvin cycle, cellular respiration, all of those things. And the first learning targets are going to be learning targets 9 and 10, which deal with photosynthesis. So on Earth, all of the energy comes from the sun. Okay, so the sun is the source of all energy that organisms use, and it all starts with autotrophs, or organisms that are able to produce their own food or capture that energy from sunlight and turn it into glucose molecules. So autotrophs are organisms that are able to convert the sunlight into food. Okay, so we're talking about plants or some bacteria that can do this as well. And then heterotrophs are organisms that must consume other organisms in order to obtain energy. So the energy that we're going to focus on in ag bio or any bio course is ATP, or adenosine triphosphate. So it's a nucleotide that is composed of 3 parts: a nitrogenous base called adenine, a 5-carbon sugar called ribose, and 3 phosphate molecules. And the main area that we're going to focus on that energy comes from is in between the second and third phosphate group, splitting that bond. So energy is temporarily stored in the bonds between the phosphates. And this specifically, as we just said, the bond between the second and third phosphate is where the energy is going to be released from. So remember, we talked about chemical bonds. Potential energy is stored in those bonds. You have to put energy into a chemical reaction to create bonds, and that energy is stored. So there's a high amount of energy that is stored in these phosphate bonds. So once we split the bond between the second and third phosphate group, we're left with ADP, adenosine diphosphate. So think about what di means too. And you're also left with a phosphate group, which will, all those components will go back around, sunlight will hit it, and it'll happen again where it'll be attached and turn back into ATP. So in order to reobtain the third phosphate, energy must be obtained from food, or if it's a plant, could be sunlight. ATP is only stored temporarily. The body never keeps large quantities of ATP on hand because of the energy needed to create them. So organisms store energy in long-term molecules like starch and glycogen. That takes us back to Unit 2, the macromolecules unit. We talked about that. And ATP is used to power cellular processes like building concentration gradients across cell membranes. We talked about active transport, when you're having to actively pump material against the concentration gradient, because nature does not like concentration gradients. Nature wants everything to be at equilibrium. So the equation for photosynthesis can be written in 2 ways. You see over here, you do need to know that. Not very difficult to remember, but it does need to be remembered. So if you need to pause the video, put this in your notes, please do so. So without sunlight, photosynthesis cannot occur. Sunlight is what drives photosynthesis. It's what makes autotrophs be able to do the process. So pigments are large molecules that absorb sunlight and convert it to a form that the cell can use. So the light that is absorbed is what the plants are going to use, and that is also the light that we do not see. Light that is reflected is light that the plants does not use, and is what we will see. So chlorophyll is a principal and the primary pigment that is found in plants. It is a green pigment, which means that it absorbs all the light except green waves. Excuse me. It reflects these green light waves. And that is why we see green for most of the year, most of the growing season rather, when we look at plants. Within chlorophyll, there's a magnesium atom at the center that readily gives up 2 electrons, which become energized by sunlight that they receive. And these electrons in magnesium will power the ETC, or electron transport chain. So they are carried by electron carriers, which store energy temporarily. Other pigments funnel light into the chlorophyll for this process to occur. And photosystems, so a group of pigments on the thylakoid membrane. A thylakoid membrane is part of chloroplast. So photosystem 1 and photosystem 2 are the photosystems located in the thylakoid membrane. So the two reactions of photosynthesis, you have the light-dependent reaction and the light-independent reaction. The light-dependent reaction, that is the reaction that involves sunlight. Okay, so water is split, so high-energy electron carriers and ATP can be created, and oxygen is a byproduct. The interesting thing that most people forget is that oxygen, while we view it as, and it is, necessary for us and other animals, it is not the primary goal product of this process. It's a waste product. It's what's left over from splitting water. Then you have the light independent reaction, also known as the Calvin cycle. This is the reaction that creates sugars and does not need light. Carbon dioxide molecules are transformed with high energy electrons and ATP to create a glucose molecule. All right, so just kind of wrap up learn targets 9 and 10. The reactants and products of both the light-dependent reaction and the Calvin cycle found within photosynthesis. So the reactants of the light-dependent reaction, you have water, NADP+, which is a electron carrier that does not have excited electrons, and ADP, adenosine diphosphate. And the products are oxygen, which is put off, NADPH, which is an electron carrier that has picked up excited electrons from the magnesium atom that was hit with sunlight, and ATP, which has had energy from the sun put into it to reattach to phosphate group 2 ADP. And the Calvin cycle, the reactants are carbon dioxide, the excited electron, or the electron carrier with the excited electrons, NADPH, and ATP. The products are glucose, NADP plus, which is an empty electron carrier, and ADP, which has had the second and third phosphate bond broken. And so that's it for this video. Be sure you complete the video form that goes with this. If you have questions, let me know. Thank you.